Hello everybody, I'm Mike, CTO and co-founder at Callstack, and before we move to our React Native Show podcast, I have a quick announcement to say that might be something that is interesting to you. Today I'm looking for the best React Native developers to join my team. Besides working on high-end software used by millions, we also contribute to open source projects such as React Native Paper, React Native Testing Library, or Repack. And so you will have an opportunity to develop your skills and knowledge within these projects, as well as move your own ideas into life by taking part in our R&D program. We are a great team full of React Native crazy people about this technology, and we can't wait to share our knowledge and experience with you. And so if this sounds like something exciting, don't wait anymore and join us. It's great to be part of such a team. Check out the link below and apply, and I'm hoping to see you soon in our Callstack office or maybe remotely depending on your location. Bye-bye.
Hello and welcome to the React Native Show podcast. I'm Łukasz, your host, and in this episode, we'll dive into the world of mobile payments. What are mobile payments? How do they work? And is it a good idea to implement them in your mobile application? How do you even go about it? This and much, much more is waiting for you in this episode of the React Native Show podcast. Let's get started and introduce my guests. So, joining me today are Charlie from Stripe and Kuba from Callstack. Charlie, let's start from you. Please tell us a few words about yourself and what you are working with on a daily basis.
Yeah, absolutely. So hi, my name's Charlie. Like you said, I work at Stripe, actually pretty new. So I just started this year. And before that, I was working on other React Native things over at Expo. And so on a daily basis at Stripe, my major focus is the Stripe React Native library. And this is essentially a layer on top of our Android and iOS native libraries that let you implement payments really easily into your React Native app.
Okay, thank you, Charlie. I'm really impressed. Like the Expo background and Stripe background, I think you're the experts we need in this episode of the React Native Show podcast. Thank you, Charlie. So next up is Kuba. Can you introduce yourself to our viewers?
Sure. Hi, I'm Kuba. I am a software developer at Callstack, focusing mostly on React and React Native. So my life has been entangled with React Native for almost 6 years now. Recently, I also joined Stripe Developer Community Experts program as a community expert for React Native.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Kuba, for your introduction. And now that we know who we're talking to, let's begin our topic. Just to make everything clear, I'll now briefly summarize the short history in a few bullet points of payments in general. Okay, so in 1994, the first e-commerce transaction occurred. It was Pizza Hut that allowed their customers to order pizza via a restaurant's website. In some other sources, I read that it was actually a Sting CD being sold in 1994, but we know for sure that it was in 1994. Then, in 1997, the first mobile transaction. Coca-Cola created vending machines that enabled their customers to pay for drinks via text messages. By 2001, Domino's Pizza is already taking orders through cell phones. 2 years after the iPhone was introduced, so in 2009, Stripe starts its services, and the mobile payment market crosses 69 billion in sales. Then, in 2014, Apple introduces Apple Pay, and next year, Samsung and Android Pay, become available. So, with that historical background out of the way, let's talk about today's possibilities that mobile payment offers. So, we have like in-app micropayments, online purchases, services, and many, many more with different methods so that user experience is easy, fast, and friendly. Kuba, can you maybe tell us a little bit about the different types of mobile payments that exist? What we can pay for?
Sure. Yeah, so basically there are multiple ways of making money on mobile applications. So you can, for example, of course, create a paid application. So it will be like a one-time payment or subscription-based. And this kind of payments are something that application stores are responsible for. So there is nothing to do for us as developers, except the proper setup of our application in App Store or Google Play. The second group that we can specify basically is something called in-app purchases. In gaming industry, we can call it micropayments. So this kind is for payments that are about the application's digital services. So this applies to paywalls, paid modules or features of the app, items in games, the list go on. So if a payment applies to, let's call it digital services, then it lands under this category basically. So payments like this has to be done through the app stores, Google Play or Apple App Store. So on the one hand, it is quite nice because again, it's on the store to process the payment. But on the other hand, you need to be aware of some, for example, fees.
The third, and from what I heard, there are quite a big ones, like 30% cut on your in-app purchases. That's quite a lot, right?
Yeah, exactly. This is not small fee, unfortunately. So there is also this third group of payments. Those are payments for physical services. So this is everything related to paying for material goods or services, not related to the app functionalities itself. So, e-commerce applications, food delivery apps. So this is in this group. And here we have full freedom. So there are no rules from stores. Developers can use payment method of their choice. The only requirement is that it has to be available on mobile, of course. But the main drawback here is the fact that whole payment processing, in this case, is on us, developers or business owners. What's worth mentioning is it's not that easy to draw a line between those last two groups I mentioned.
So you mean digital services and physical goods, physical services?
Yeah, this is not always that obvious to draw this line. So basically, it's not always that easy to understand if it should be done through in-app purchases using those application stores mechanism, or if I, as a developer, can implement my own payments in the application. So because of that, from time to time, we hear about some apps removed from app stores or lawsuits against Apple or Google.
Yeah. When I doing some research for this episode, I talked with some developers from Callstack, saying me that I should really go to Reddit, because on Reddit there are a lot of developers that have a feud with Apple and are angry about their apps being taken out of the App Store for like violating unclear policies, right? So if I have a service, I want my users to pay for the service on site, so I don't have to, on like a website, so I don't have to give Apple a pay cut. But in my mobile application, I want them to be able to log in, but they have to know from somewhere else that they have to pay for the service somewhere else, because I'm not allowed to specify anywhere in my application that this service is paid, right? Yeah, so that is somehow of a gray zone area. So
it's also, I think, kind of worth mentioning that like the gray zone applies to the reviewers as well. Like, as it's hard for developers to decide, is my app providing a physical service or a digital service? The reviewers also don't 100% know. So some apps, let's say two apps provide like a very similar service and a very similar implementation. Like, it may even depend on which reviewer you get and which app review, like, I don't know if it's the first, second, third.
yeah.
That kind of decides like, will your app be approved or not? So it's like, I feel like gray zone is an understatement here.
Okay, yeah. So our suggestion is, if your app is in the App Store and you somehow got through all the policies, don't update it. Like, just leave it there. Be quiet about it. And if it got rejected, like, try to resubmit it with some minor changes, right? So maybe you can find someone more lenient to review your app and allow it. Let's summarize this part. So Kuba just said that we have a few different categories of payments at mobile. You can pay for a mobile application that gives a cut to Apple and Google. You can have your in-app purchases, micropayments, however you want to call them. That's for online services. That's for digital items, and that also goes through the stores. And then third category, the most broad and the one that we will actually talk about today, is physical goods and physical services, not in app, but like Kuba said, some kind of like food delivery service or hotel service or something like that. So in this third category, maybe Charlie, you can tell us what are the what are the payment methods that we can use when we implement like these broader categories?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the like short answer is that there's just so many. And it's also really region dependent for, like, let's say you're a developer. What really decides like what payment methods you want to add is where your app is going to be available and where it will be most used. Because, for instance, the US, like credit card or debit card, like card payments kind of reign supreme and are by far the most common. But I think in Europe or in certain countries of Europe, like bank debits are far more, like are over 50% of all of the online payment transactions. And then there's also like kind of closer regional ones, like I think Blik is in Poland.
We have Blik. Blik
okay,
is great.
yeah.
Thank you for Blik, Polish banks.
Yeah. Shout out. And then obviously like Apple and Google Pay, and then paying via invoices. There's also like buy now, pay later is something that we're getting a lot of requests for at Stripe. So I don't know if you guys have heard of like Klarna or Afterpay.
Yeah.
And then there's also another interesting one that I had like never heard of in my life before I started working at Stripe a couple months ago, are these voucher-based payments, which is like one is called OXXO. And so you basically provide your app, there's an application, and the vendor scans it and you get like a voucher to purchase a good. And then you go to some other place later on, show your voucher and pay for your vouchers there. So it's kind of like a buy now, pay later, but I don't know, it was a very different payment method than I've ever heard before.
Yeah, okay. And to clarify there, you said Apple Pay and Google Pay, but those are different, right? From the in-app purchases. Those are two different payment methods.
Yeah, that's correct. They're two different payment methods and they are not applied to in-app purchases, which is what Kuba was talking about earlier, where Apple and Google take a cut.
Yeah. Okay, so now we have a general overview of the payment, what we can pay for and how we can pay for it. So let's jump right into the next subject, which is quite important, I guess, if it's not the most important: security. So we are dealing with money. So I guess there is a lot of security requirements for my application to be like in line with the law, let's say, and like safe from hackers. Charlie, do you have any thoughts on that? Can you elaborate on this point?
Yeah, I feel like security is a huge topic, just in general, first of all, and then obviously when you're dealing with anything financial or financial services, then it's just an even bigger risk, because it's like, okay, if my app doesn't have like good security standards, I'm not just giving away like my users' email addresses, which is pretty bad, but I'm giving away their bank account information, which is awful and could ruin their lives. So I think adding any type of payments to an app, that's something that you definitely have to be aware of. But at the same time, there are plenty of ways to make sure that, let's say worst case scenario, someone loses their device. It doesn't necessarily mean that the attacker has access to their payment method. So there's all of these, like, basically you can think of it as two-factor authentication or something like that. But a lot of these security things kind of are, the onus is on the app developer to make sure that they are aware of these security implementations and guards, and following them. And then the other half of that is to make sure that whatever processor you're using is also implementing like the guards that they should be. So if I can like shout out to Stripe's security standards a little bit over here.
Yeah, please.
So Stripe implements, I think, like pretty obvious HTTPS over all connections and traffic. For anyone that doesn't know, that just means that the requests are all encrypted. So any attacker doesn't really know anything about what's inside the requests. I actually just learned this recently, is that Stripe also uses something called HSTS. And all these acronyms are super confusing, but essentially they're all just meaning like our stuff is secure. So HSTS essentially forces all browsers that are interacting with Stripe to use HTTPS, or else it just won't work. And then Google and Mozilla both have these like lists of domains that require, like, are hard coded to require HTTPS. So I would expect pretty much any payment processor to want to be on that list, because you would never do any payment related requests over just like an HTTP connection.
Yeah, I think we'll come to the payment processors in a moment, but first, to just summarize this first part that we almost done. But let's say I'm a stupid junior software developer. I got my first job, and my first boss, like it might be like even a freelance thing, wants me to implement a payment in the mobile application. So how do I go about it? I want to implement it from scratch, obviously. I don't know anything about Stripe. I don't know anything about payment processors. I don't know anything about security even, but I really want to get my hand dirty and just go in there, start processing payments. Like, give me your credit card. I want you to type this credit card number, and that's done. How do I do that, Kuba?
I mean, obviously, you can create and implement everything from scratch. You're a developer, so it's your job to implement stuff. But probably you shouldn't do that. And the simple answer why is that it's just too complicated. Like Charlie said, there are so many rules, regulations, that we need to comply to, and there is this whole security area that is not that easy to understand. So you need to be like a security magician.
Sorry, but maybe Charlie is blowing this out of proportion. Maybe he just worried about his job security. He wants people to go to the Stripe. Why not? Like, why don't I? Like, give me like a concrete example. What can happen? What's the worst that can happen when I implement this one field that says, give me your credit card?
I mean, you can lose your customers' money. So yeah. This is the worst thing that can happen. And, this is pretty much the worst thing that can, happen like at all. When you're creating a mobile application. It's not a small bug when a button is displayed incorrectly. you lost your customers' money. So this is a huge deal. That's why this security area is so important, and that's why maybe this is not a good idea to implement payment mechanisms from scratch.
Yeah, I guess so. Sorry, Charlie, I was just joking. Like,
no, you're fine.
Yeah. So yeah. To summarize, you don't implement payments from scratch. Like, I would argue you shouldn't implement even logins from scratch. You shouldn't like handle login data. You should like outsource it to like Google Auth providers and stuff like that. And this is I think one level lower than payment processing, right? Like emails and passwords. So let's say I'm this guy that hired this previous developer to do my application, like to create it, and I told him, implement me some payments. Go ahead and implement me some payments. And he comes back a week later. He says, "Oh, Kuba told me I shouldn't. Like, I've heard this podcast. This really good, the React Native Show podcast that you should subscribe to, and like I shouldn't. Like, he told me just implement Stripe." So this business guy that never heard of Stripe either, like, scratch his head and like says, "Why should I? Why should I bother implementing Stripe? What Stripe brings to the table?" And like more broadly, what are the payments processors, aggregators, as I call them, and how do I go about implementing them from a business point of view?
Yeah, well, so my first answer would be hopefully this business person gets in touch with an actual salesperson and not me, because that salesperson will speak to it way better. But I'm going to do my best. I think it's good to kind of like describe exactly, like give a short introduction to Stripe. So Stripe's own definition is that we build economic infrastructure for the internet. And so the first most obvious thing here is that Stripe allows you to easily take, accept payments, and you don't have to worry about what payment method and if it's a credit card or a debit card and all these things. You just know you accept payments. And so we work then directly with like financial institutions and banks and all of that stuff, so that you as a developer or you as a business person don't need to think about it. And instead you're just making like a simple API call. Because, let's go back to that example of you're building your own payments solution, totally bare bones. Even if you're like a wizard developer, it's not all about, the technical aspect. It's about like, are you willing to speak to the banks and like all of that stuff? Because that's something that's included as well. So everything is kind of handled in the background for you by Stripe. And instead now you're just, providing a credit card component and accepting money, which is, I think, what everyone would rather be doing than spending their time, building infrastructure.
Yeah, and also like the whole array of the available methods, right? Like the credit card and Blik in Poland, and this what do you say, like vouchers somewhere in the world?
Yeah, payment vouchers, and that was OXXO in Mexico. If someone listening to this has used that, that would be so cool, honestly, because I'd never heard of it before.
Yeah, get in touch with Charlie, and he'll introduce you to Stripe. Like, you can integrate it. It's all gonna be fine. Yeah. So, with that, this business guy, okay, like, I'm impressed. Let's do that. He comes back to this junior developer, and like, what would it take for this junior developer to implement Stripe? How does it work from technical perspective? What do I do? What primitives Stripe gives me as let's treat it as a general mobile first, like native Android, native iOS, and then let's move on to how you expose all of that to React Native.
Yes. Yes. So basically, since we are mostly trying to discuss React Native here in this podcast, let me focus on this React Native part. And what's great about Stripe is that it offers, tons of different SDKs for different platforms. And one of those platforms is, of course, React Native. So there is this Stripe React Native library that uses native Stripe SDKs under the hood. And thanks to this library, it is pretty easy to implement payments in your React Native mobile application. So you just need to install this Stripe React Native dependency, rub your code in some Stripe provider, and you're ready to use all of those functionalities provided by the library. So it consists of multiple useful hooks, functions to make those different type of payments. There are also, for example, components like card input, or even the whole screen that can you just can display this payment screen without worrying anything about the UI and how to implement those stuff. So it's quite easy to use. So if you are a React Native developer and you know how to use libraries, then pretty much you should be able to do that without any problems. Maybe the only thing that you need to be aware of is that Stripe integration requires additions into your backend services. Okay. So it's not that you can just use the UI Stripe React Native library. You need to implement some backend functions as well. But fortunately, most of the popular backend languages, platforms, frameworks have official Stripe SDKs. So implementing payments there should not be a challenge for you or your backend team.
Okay, so what about if I don't know how to use libraries, but I know hooks, I know providers, right? So it should be relatively easy to just plug and play those components from React Native to my JS code and just run with it.
Yep, exactly. It even works without any problems in Expo. So if you want to make everything simpler, you can just create a fresh Expo app and use payments there.
And we can thank Charlie for that, for his amazing work at Expo and now Stripe.
Yes, thank you very much.
Charlie, can you speak something to like this native integration? What happens under the JavaScript layer? How those components are optimized to run in the mobile environment?
Yeah, so everything that Stripe React Native is doing is providing like a native-like experience, because it literally is the native experience. So we are calling directly into Stripe iOS and Stripe Android for both the UI components that Kuba was talking about. So like card input and things like that. Same goes for the API calls that we're making behind the scenes. If like with Stripe, you basically have two options. Do you want to build your own UI and use our functions then to call, add payment method or confirm payment? Or do you want to outsource, your UI creation and all of that also to Stripe and use what Kuba was talking about, the payment sheet, which essentially just brings up a modal. And it's like a really streamlined experience for users and everything like that, to where you're just responding to like an on success or on error hook at that point. And it's really the only thing you need to add. But anyway, so that's all happening on the native layer. And we're just exposing it through to React Native. So you're using your users are getting the exact same experience they would on a purely native app.
Yeah, and I would imagine Stripe has also a library for web. And we all know that web is just like JavaScript, to be honest. What prevents me from using like Stripe.js library instead of like Stripe React Native library in my React Native code? Is that even possible? Because in my junior past, I used some like simple JS libraries in React Native, not HTML code, but like JavaScript. Would that even work? And what are the differences between the two?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. And one thing I would say is that if you back up a little bit, it probably is doable if by just having your website use Stripe.js and then launching something like a web view. But I think that in React Native in general, people are like moving away from that because it's just not a great experience to have people open your mobile app and then just go through a web view instead. But Stripe.js is also distributed in a weirder way, to where you're like loading it directly from Stripe's servers rather than bundling it into your JavaScript bundle. And this is for something called PCI compliance, which is a whole nother security thing that we don't have to get back into. But basically that's not doable on in a native mobile app. So that kind of prevents us from using Stripe.js directly. And besides that, I think you would lose something in performance if you're not relying directly on the native components that have been kind of crafted specifically for that platform.
Yeah. Okay, understandable. Yeah. Okay. I think we have it. I think we have this part wrapped up. So basically, there is a library called, what is it called? Stripe React Native?
It's called @Stripe React Native. We are still in a V0, like we haven't launched V1 yet. And
don't worry, React Native.
Yeah.
React Native is not on the first version for like 5 years already, or even more.
So I don't feel too bad about it. But if we change the name, just if you Google Stripe React Native, it'll probably come up.
Yeah. Okay. Is there something I didn't ask you about, Kuba, Charlie, but you really wanted to talk about in a context of payments in mobile?
I think you may have asked this, and I just want to make sure that I answer it for completeness, because maybe someone listening to this is like, oh, Stripe sounds really great, but this guy didn't even mention how much it costs. So I'm sure I'm giving up an arm and a leg to use it. So I should just reference really quickly that Stripe charges you based on transactions that go through in live mode. So like test mode obviously is you could test Stripe with a demo account for free and get things running in a day and see if you like it. But cost, you should look at our pricing page because it depends on the exact payment methods you're accepting. But it's something like 2.9% on each like credit card transaction. And then bank debits are less because credit cards charge more and there's all this payment stuff in the background. But
which is way less than 30%.
Yeah, that's true. So,
and also maybe to be fair, when you raise this like fee question, so maybe also to be fair, we should say that there are other service providers like Stripe. You can choose from like, I don't know, there are 3 probably at least. It's just that we have this great relationship with Stripe. We have Kuba both on Callstack and on Stripe Experts team. So that's why I have this great opportunity to talk with you both. Yeah, so maybe we can finish up this light talk about payments in mobile with like an open question. And my open question would be, and you can change it if you want, you can speak for whatever you want. But my question to you, the last question is, what do you think is the future of mobile payments? How will we pay in the future with our phones?
I think that Stripe React Native will be the ubiquitous solution for all mobile payments across the world. No, I don't know. I think it's a hard question, but like we can all agree that everything is getting less based on like physical things like cards and cash. Like the world is just becoming more digital, which sounds like I'm like, I don't know, in the 90s and talking about like the invention of the internet and stuff. But I think online transactions are just growing and growing. And then if at the same rate, like our usage of mobile devices, like they're not even phones anymore, is growing and growing. So I feel like it's just growing and growing, but this is all me making a guess.
Yeah, I also think that basically mobile payments, this is a future. So this is probably direction that we are going into. And by the way, I love that you called the payment topic a light topic.
It's light and entertaining. Like, this is something that I do in my free time. I read about payment providers. So my hot take about future of mobile payments would be that probably security will still be the biggest like concern, and maybe you will see like payment with eyes, right? Or like with authentication with voice or something like that. So I don't have to write my PIN or my, I don't know, like the technology goes forward so fast. I feel old.
Yeah, anything we say in a year is going to sound like, oh my gosh, I can't believe they thought that. So
Yeah.
who knows?
Yeah. Charlie, Kuba, thank you so much for joining me in this light and entertainful episode of the React Native Show podcast. I was Łukasz. Please subscribe to our channel to hear more of these talks with experts in React Native field. Thank you so much. Hello, everybody. Welcome back. I know we finished and we said goodbye already, but after the episode, we were chatting, and actually Charlie has something to add to the episode. So Charlie, I give you a voice.
Yeah, so we've covered a whole bunch in the podcast, I feel like, but one last thing I wanted to do was sort of a call to action. So if you use the Stripe React Native library or any Stripe library really, and you have either feedback or run into a bug or an issue, just please file like a GitHub issue or reach out to us on Twitter or Discord, because I feel like one of the special things about React Native in particular is how strong the community surrounding it is. Like, I feel that is one of the major factors that React Native has seen the success that it has over the past however many years, even without having like its first major release yet. So I think it's important for us to try and keep that up. So that means for users that are using libraries to give feedback, and then for library authors to really listen to that feedback and be actionable on, fixes and features. So yeah, just let me know what you want, and so we can do it.
Definitely. Yeah, thanks, Charlie. So again, thank you for joining. Subscribe to this channel. File GitHub issues if you find any issues or have any thoughts about Stripe libraries. You can also file issues and thoughts on Callstack libraries that we have on GitHub. And I promise we'll not be back in another public service announcement. This is it. That was our episode. Thank you so much. See you in the next one.